Montana Territory, late spring of 1873, the wind clawed through the jagged pines above the Gallatin River as Florence Zeller gripped the side of the stagecoach, her satin gloves damp with sweat despite the cold. She was 23, the daughter of a Boston banker, and 3 days into a journey west meant to erase everything she had once been. Her father had married her off to a man he owed money to, a cattleman named Roy Thatch, twice her age, with a handshake that smelled of whiskey and skin like dried leather. "It is what must be done," her father had said, eyes flat, voice low. "You will keep your head high. You are a Zeller." Now Florence sat beside a coughing driver, her wedding dress packed in a trunk behind them, her future waiting in the dusty town of Willow Creek. She had not cried. Not when she signed the papers. Not when her mother kissed her cheek goodbye with trembling lips. Not even when the train pulled away from the only life she had ever known. But when the wheel snapped on a rut and the coach tilted hard, throwing her against the side, it was not the impact that pulled a sob from her, it was the sudden, wild thought that maybe she would rather die on this road than live in that man's house. "Whoa there!" the driver shouted, yanking the reins. Horses screamed. Wood cracked. The coach tipped. Then a shadow moved through the trees. A man on horseback burst from the brush, lean and fast, rifle already drawn. He was young 20s maybe, and his voice was calm, steady, southern by the sound of it. "Hold your damn fire," he said, leaping off the horse and grabbing the lead mare's bit. "Easy now, girl. Easy." In the mess of it, Florence's hat had gone flying. Her hair had come loose. She sat in the dust, skirts torn, gasping, watching the stranger rein the horses in like it was nothing. "Horse through a shoe," he muttered, then looked down at her. "You hurt, miss?" She blinked, then shook her head. He held out a hand. "Name is Merritt Ashford. You headed to Willow Creek?" "Yes," she said, staring at his hand. It was rough, scarred, and sun-browned. A working man's hand. "I can get you there," he said. "Not far. Wagon's done for." The driver groaned behind them. Merritt glanced back, then crouched beside him. "Busted ankle," he said after a moment. "He ain't riding any time soon." Florence hesitated. "You are a cowboy." He grinned. "I reckon I am. You still want that ride?" And just like that, Florence Zeller, raised on lace and French letters, was lifted up onto a horse behind a cowboy. Her arms wrapped around his middle, her cheek brushing his shoulder. They rode the rest of the way in silence, the air thick with pine and earth, her heartbeat louder than the hooves beneath them. By the time they reached Willow Creek, the sky was dark and her dress was ruined. Merritt helped her down without a word and nodded toward the saloon-turned-hotel. "I will see you inside," she said, trying to gather what was left of her pride. But he caught her wrist gently. "You sure you want to go through with this?" She looked at him then, really looked. His eyes were dark green, steady. His jaw was sharp, dusted with stubble. His face was kind. "I do not have a choice," she said. He let her go. The wedding was the next afternoon. Florence wore the dress, stiff and too bright in the Montana sun. Roy Thatch was drunk before the vows were done. At the reception, he leaned in too close and whispered, "You are mine now, girl." She did not eat. She did not smile. She did not look for Merritt. But he was there, standing near the edge of the fence line, arms crossed, hat shadowing his face. 3 days later, she ran. She waited until Roy left for the saloon. Then she packed a small bag, took one of his geldings, and rode out. She had no plan, only the ache in her chest and the memory of a stranger with steady hands. She did not know where Merritt lived, only that he worked the Ashford Ranch 10 miles west. It was dusk when she arrived. The horse was heaving beneath her. She was covered in dust and sweat, her boots blistered. Merritt was in the barn, tossing hay. He turned, saw her, and dropped the pitchfork. "Jesus. Florence. I know I have no right to be here," she said quickly, "but I cannot stay with him. I would rather shovel manure for the rest of my life than lie beneath that man again." He stared at her, jaw tight. "I do not expect anything," she went on. "You do not owe me kindness." His voice was quiet. "You should not be here. I know." He stepped forward. But I am damn glad you are. Something cracked in her chest. Her eyes burned. I do not know what to do, she whispered. I have never known how to be anything but what they raised me to be. He reached out, touched her chin gently. Then let us figure it out together. She stayed in the bunkhouse that night, curled beneath a thick wool blanket, listening to the sounds of horses and wind and her own heartbeat. Merritt made no move toward her. But in the morning he brought her coffee and half a biscuit and said, "You can stay as long as you need." Florence looked up at him, and for the first time since she left Boston, she smiled. "I might need a long time." He smiled back. "Good." And just like that, something new began. The Ashford Ranch sat in a shallow bend of the Jefferson River where cottonwoods leaned toward the water and the pasture stretched long and quiet into the hills. By her third morning there, Florence woke before the rooster. The bunkhouse air was still and cold, her borrowed blanket heavy on her shoulders. She dressed quickly in the plain cotton shirt and rough wool skirt Merritt had brought her, both far too large but clean and serviceable. Outside, the sky was pale with the promise of dawn. Merritt was already by the corral, looping a halter over a young sorrel, his breath rising in white clouds. The horses huffed and shifted, hooves thudding against frost-hardened soil. She approached without calling out. He noticed her anyhow. "If you're hungry," he said, brushing straw from his sleeve, "the kitchen's open. Cookie's a quiet man, but he'll feed you just the same." "I'd rather learn," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair under her kerchief. "I've never saddled a horse." He studied her face, then nodded once. "All right, then." They began with the basics. Tack hung from pegs in the barn, worn from years of sun and use. The saddle she tried to lift was heavier than it looked, and her arms trembled before she got it halfway up the horse's back. "Here," he said, stepping behind her. He didn't touch her, only pointed. "You want to swing it up in one motion. Let the weight do most of the work." She tried again, jaw set. This time it landed clean. He gave a quiet, approving sound. By mid-morning, her palms were raw and her back ached, but she'd curried 2 mares, filled the water trough, and learned how to tie a proper slipknot. Merritt said little, only corrected her when needed, and never once offered pity. At midday, Cookie handed her a tin plate piled with beans and fried potatoes and motioned toward the barn wall where Merritt leaned. She sat beside him, the silence between them easy now, filled with the creak of leather and the buzz of flies. She kept her eyes on the hills. "Did you grow up here?" "No," he said, chewing. "Georgia. My family had a peach orchard. Didn't last after the war." She glanced at him. "Were you a soldier?" His gaze stayed on the pasture. "I was 17 when I lied my way into a uniform. My older brother never came back." "I did." She didn't press. Instead, she scooped another bite, then said, "My mother played the pianoforte every morning before breakfast. You could hear it through the whole house." Merritt looked over. "You play?" "I used to." She let out a breath. "I was taught to embroider, to sketch, to arrange flowers. None of it means a damn thing out here." "It means you paid attention," he said. "That counts." That afternoon, she walked the fence line with him, helping mend a sagging post. He handed her the hammer without comment, and she drove each nail with both hands on the grip. Her aim was poor, her fingers stung, but he only adjusted the board and nodded for her to try again. When the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long, they returned to the barn. She brushed down the sorrel on her own, slow and careful. Merritt watched her finish, then handed her a tin lantern. "I'll walk you back," he said. The bunkhouse was still and warm from the stove inside. She set the lantern on the table and turned to face him. "Thank you," she said, "for not treating me like I'll break." "You won't," he said, voice quiet. "You're already tougher than most." She hesitated. "Is there anything I can do to earn my place here?" "You're doing it." He stepped back. "Good night, Florence." She closed the door after he left and leaned against it, the lantern's light catching the edge of her jaw. Beneath the ache in her arms and the blister on her thumb, something stronger pulsed, something steady, like a rhythm she'd never been taught but somehow already knew. Out in the pasture, Merritt stood alone, hat in hand, watching the stars come out over the hills. He didn't smile, but his shoulders softened. Neither said it aloud, but something had shifted. And neither of them wanted it to shift back. The wind came down from the mountains colder than it should have been for late May. It peeled through the cottonwoods and rattled the barn roof as Florence stood at the paddock gate watching Merritt work the roan filly. He moved with a kind of careful rhythm, quiet and deliberate, hands low, voice lower. The filly's ears twitched back and forth, but she didn't buck. She circled him twice, then stopped and faced him head on. He nodded once and stepped back. Florence leaned her arms against the gate rail. She trusts you. Merritt wiped his hands on his trousers, then turned toward her. She's still deciding. She followed you. I gave her reason to. Florence let the silence stretch. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, dry dirt smudged across her forearms. Her skin had browned a shade since arriving. She hadn't noticed it until Cookie offered her coffee that morning and said, "You're starting to look like one of us." She hadn't known what that meant until Merritt looked at her now, not like a stranger who'd wandered too far from town, but like someone who might belong. "I've been thinking," she said, brushing a piece of straw from her skirt. "If I'm going to stay here, I should earn more than just my keep. Maybe help with the ledgers. I was taught bookkeeping. My father made sure of it." Merritt nodded, adjusting the bridle. "We could use that. My uncle kept records, but after he passed, it's been mostly guesswork. You never mentioned him before. He raised me after the war. This ranch was his. He left it to me when his heart gave out last winter." She glanced toward the distant hills. "That must have been a hard season." He gave a short breath. "Snow came early. We lost 4 calves and the chimney cracked. Spent Christmas patching it with river stone." Florence turned toward him. "You stayed anyway. Nothing else to go to." He met her eyes. "And this land's honest. Doesn't pretend to be more than it is." She stepped closer to the fence. "There's something steadier about it. Everything back east felt like porcelain, pretty and too easy to break." He watched her a moment, then said, "You're not porcelain." "I used to be. Not anymore." The gate creaked as he stepped through it, the filly trailing behind him on a loose lead. He tied her off and reached for a tin can of oats. Florence touched the rail, then asked quietly, "Do you think it's possible to become someone else? After everything's already set?" Merritt poured the oats slowly. "I think folks don't change unless they have to. But when they do, when they choose it, it sticks deeper." She nodded, eyes on his hands. "I've been thinking about divorce." He didn't flinch, just rested the can on a post. "In Montana territory, you'd need grounds. Desertion counts. Roy hasn't come looking." "No, I doubt he will." Merritt looked out toward the blue rise of mountains. "The law's slow out here, but it moves." "I'm not afraid of slow," she said. "You shouldn't be." The filly nickered. Florence stepped forward, her palm flat. The horse hesitated, then nuzzled her fingers. "She's soft when she wants to be," Merritt said. Florence smiled faintly. "So am I." They stood like that a while, not touching, not needing to. The air smelled of old hay and dust and the river in the distance. Florence hadn't written her mother since arriving. She didn't know what she would say. That she'd left a husband who never loved her? That she'd found something steadier in a man who said less but meant more? When the sun dipped behind the ridge and the shadows bent long across the paddock, Merritt said, "We've got a branding coming up. 3 days. Ranch hands from all over will be here. It'll be loud, long, and hot. Can I help?" He studied her face. "You sure?" She nodded once. "I don't scare easy." His voice was quiet. "I know." He handed her the empty can. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. She looked up at him, and something unspoken passed between them, something that didn't need naming just yet but was beginning to feel like the shape of a new life. Florence turned toward the bunkhouse, the can swinging lightly from her hand. Behind her, Merritt stayed by the rail, watching the filly settle in the fading light. Neither said good night. It wasn't needed anymore. The branding fire burned low by the time the last calf was marked. Florence stood by the water trough, sleeves rolled and hands reddened from lifting gates and hauling buckets. Her shoulders ached, but she stayed upright, watching Merritt tie off the last branding iron and slide it into the barrel of ash. The scent of scorched hide lingered in the air, mixed with sweat and singed rope. A few ranch hands lingered by the fire pit, passing a jug and trading stories with dust in their voices. The others had drifted off toward the bunkhouse or the lean to behind the barn where Cookie had set out tin plates of beans and cornmeal cakes. Florence hadn't eaten yet. Her stomach rumbled, but her feet held her in place, eyes following Merritt as he moved across the yard. He was slower now, the long day carved into the way he bent to gather the last of the rope coils. "You held your own," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I dropped the gate once." The heifer nearly took off. She didn't. Florence let herself lean against the fence post. "I thought I'd be clumsy." "Useless." "You weren't." She looked at his hands, blistered, dried with sweat, the knuckles scraped raw. "You're bleeding." He shrugged. "It happens." She reached for the kerchief at her neck, damp with hours of work, and gently pressed it to the worst of the scrapes. "You could let someone else do this part." "I don't ask a man what I won't do myself." "I know," she said, folding the cloth and offering it back. "I've seen it." He didn't take the cloth. Instead, he looked at her, quiet and steady. "You ever think about what comes next?" "I try not to. I mean after the papers clear. After Roy's gone from your name." She stared at the firelight flickering across the barn door. "I don't have a name that's mine yet. I've only ever been someone's daughter. Someone's wife. I don't know what it means to be just Florence." Merritt nodded once, then looked out toward the hills. "When the war ended, I didn't know how to go home. Everything was still standing, but none of it fit anymore. So I came west. Figured if I built something with my own hands, I'd feel like I belonged in it. And do you? Not always. But now and then, I see the sun come up over that ridge, and I think maybe I was meant to be here." Florence was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Do you want a family?" He didn't look startled by the question. "Someday. Not afraid of the weight of it? I carried worse things." She swallowed. "I don't know if I can be what most men want. I'm not most men." That silenced her. The fire crackled behind them. A horse stomped once in the corral. She turned halfway toward him. "I'm not asking for anything yet. I just need to know. If I stayed longer than just through summer, if I learned how to build something here, would you want me to?" Merritt didn't move for a moment. Then he reached out and brushed a straw from her shoulder, slow and careful as though every inch of her mattered. "I'd want that," he said. Florence's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She only nodded and reached for his hand, their fingers knotting together without effort like they'd done it 100 times before. From the barn, Cookie called out that supper was going cold. Merritt gave her hand a soft squeeze and let go. They walked to the lean-to side by side, not speaking, not needing to. The air smelled of ash and warm bread, and the stars were starting to gather across the sky. Florence had never eaten from a tin plate before she came west. Never sat on a crate beside a man who worked from sunup to sundown with quiet pride. But that night, with her hair braided back and her arms sore from effort, she ate beside Merritt as if she'd always belonged there. And for the first time since leaving Boston, she didn't feel like she was trying to outrun her past. She felt like she was walking toward something true. Rain came soft and steady in early June, falling in a hush over the valley grass and soaking the earth dark. The ranch slowed with its fences held, the livestock fed, and nothing pressed hard against the day. Inside the barn, the scent of wet wood and horses lingered as Florence worked beside Merritt, rolling bandages for the older gelding's swollen leg. Her fingers were quicker now, surer. She wrapped the cloth with even tension, pinned it just as he'd shown her 2 days earlier. Merritt knelt to check her work. "That's clean," he said. "You've got the touch." "I memorized the way you did it," she said. "You don't rush. I've seen what happens when folks do." She folded the last of the linen. "Cookie mentioned your uncle was the one who taught you animal care." Merritt nodded. He'd been a field medic during the war. Said if you can stitch a man's thigh in the dark, you can wrap a leg right. Florence stood slowly, brushing straw from her skirt. "I'd like to learn more, not just for the ranch. I want to be useful if someone's hurt." He watched her a beat. "I'll teach you what I know." The rain eased by afternoon. Puddles dotted the yard and a low mist clung to the hills beyond. Florence walked the perimeter with Merritt, checking where the creek had swelled near the south fence. A tree limb had caught against the wire, dragging it loose. "I'll lift it," she said, stepping into the mud. Merritt caught her elbow. "Let me. That current's stronger than it looks." She let him pass, but only just. He waded in, boots sinking deep, and pulled the branch free with a grunt. Water surged around his calves. When he climbed back out, soaked to the knees, he shook his head. "Fence'll hold," he said. "But we'll need a new post by week's end." They started back toward the barn. The wet earth clung to their steps. Florence slowed near the cottonwoods and picked a sprig of yarrow, pale and wild along the edge. "My mother used to keep pressed flowers in a ledger," she said. She said they reminded her of what passed quietly. Merritt looked at the plant in her hand. "You miss her." "More than I let myself admit," she said. "But I don't want to be like her." She traded her voice for comfort. "You haven't," he said. They walked in silence the rest of the way. That evening, Merritt sat across from her in the bunkhouse, a ledger open between them. The fire was low, and the only sound was the scratch of pencil and the creak of wood settling with night. Florence tallied the feed records, her handwriting straight and precise, the page already half full. "There's a quiet way you have," Merritt said. She looked up. "Do you mean that kindly?" "I do." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've known loud women. Hard ones, too. But you notice things. Give your words slow. That steadiness matters." Florence set the pencil down. "When I was young, I used to dream of speaking before a crowd. I thought if I could just say something right, the world might change. And now, I think the world changes when someone listens." Merritt's gaze held hers for a long moment. "I want you to stay," he said. She didn't look away. "I already have." He reached across the table and she met his hand halfway. No rush. Just the weight of choice between them, real and grounded. The fire popped once and she smiled. That night, she didn't return to the bunkhouse alone. They moved slow, careful as breath. He undid the buttons of her shirt with hands that never trembled, and she leaned into him without fear. There was no performance between them, only warmth and the quiet certainty of being seen fully for the first time. By morning, the rain was gone. Mist lifted from the grass, and the sky stretched wide and clear. Florence stood barefoot on the porch of Merritt's cabin, hair unbraided, coffee warm in her hands. He came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "I never thought I'd share this place," he said. "You're not just sharing it," she said softly. "We're building it." He didn't speak, but his grip tightened. 3 weeks later, the divorce was finalized by a judge in Virginia City. Roy Thatch hadn't contested it. Word came by post, folded neat with the courthouse seal. Florence read it once, then set it aside without ceremony. That night, Merritt brought out a ring. Silver, simple, and shaped by the local blacksmith. "I don't have a church suit," he said, "but I've got a clean shirt and I'd like to marry you." Florence touched the ring. "Then let's do it proper. With the creek and the sky and your hands in mine." They married under the cottonwoods with Cookie and one of the neighbor boys as witnesses. No dress, no veil. Just truth and sun and the land they both belonged to. In the years that followed, they built a life from scratch. The ranch held steady. The filly grew into a strong broodmare. Florence kept the books and treated wounds and planted yarrow along the south fence. Merritt taught her to track weather by the shape of the clouds, and she taught him to read by candlelight in winter. They had a son first, then a daughter. Both born in the cabin, both with eyes like their father's. Florence sang old lullabies to them, soft ones her mother never dared voice aloud. Merritt carved them toys from pine and taught them to ride before they could walk straight. The ranch stayed small, but it never faltered. No one ever came looking for her again. In the quiet moments beside the fire, or watching the sun stretch long across the pasture, Florence sometimes thought of the girl she'd been, stepping off that stagecoach in silk gloves and fear. She didn't miss her. She had become someone else. Not porcelain. Not anyone's property. Just Florence Ashford. Loved and free.